How can my own mother plan for me to be raped by a tout? I thought mothers are the kindest and truest. Why is my own cruel and selfish to me? Akunne cried bitterly. Welcome to Muunlight Tales, where stories are brought to life. In a small village in the heart of West Africa, there lived a widow named Nwanyike. Nwanyike's deep longing for a son was tied to the tragic loss of her first child, Obifuna, who was her pride and joy. At just 3 years old, Obifuna was a curious and lively boy, cherished by his mother. One fateful day, after a joyful outing at the bustling market, where Nwanyike bought him a small wooden lion, tragedy struck on their way home. As they rode on a motorbike through crowded streets, a cart overloaded with grain tipped into their path. The driver swerved violently to avoid it, causing the bike to lose balance. In the chaos, Nwanyike's protective grip on Obifuna slipped, and they were both thrown to the ground. When Nwanyike regained her senses, she found Obiafuna lying motionless a few feet away, his beloved wooden lion broken beside him. Despite the efforts of bystanders and Nwanyike's desperate cries, Obiafuna was gone, leaving her devastated and haunted by the loss. This heartbreaking incident became a defining moment in her life, shaping her longing for another son to fill the void left by Obiafuna. 1 year later, she became pregnant and wished for a son so badly that she bought only baby boy clothes, hoping that her Obifuna was coming back to her. After 9 months, she gave birth to a bouncing baby girl. Akunne's birth had been a moment of joy, but it quickly dimmed in her mother's eyes when she realized Akunne wasn't the son she had hoped for. She was sad but accepted her fate, and hoped to try more for another chance of having a baby boy. But unfortunately, her husband died 2 months after Akunne was born. Nwanyike loved Akunne, but that love was shadowed by a relentless ache, a longing for the son she had lost. She couldn't help but see Akunne's life through the lens of that loss, believing that only another son could fill the void that Obifuna's death had carved into her soul. Mama, when will you stop worrying? Akunne asked one evening as she helped her mother pound yam in the open kitchen. Nwanyike, lined with years of hardship, darkened. I'll stop when I see a son in this family, she said, her voice cold and resolute. Your father's spirit needs to rest, and only a son can bring that peace. Akunne's heart sank. She had heard these words for as long as she could remember, but they stung each time, sharp and fresh. The weight of being seen as incomplete simply for being a girl pressed on her chest. She loved her mother, but the relentless pursuit of a son cast a shadow over everything. By the time Akunne turned 17, Nwanyike's desperation took on a new, alarming form. Whispers in the market about other young girls being forced into early marriages or situations beyond their control reached Akunne's ears, and she shuddered at the thought. But she never imagined that her own mother, the woman who once sang her lullabies, would ever push her toward such a fate. One evening, Nwanyike sat across from Akunne in their small, dimly lit parlor. She was dressed in her finest wrapper, eyes glistening with determination. Akunne, listen to me, she began, leaning forward. You are my only hope. You need to give me a son before you even think about marriage. The words hit Akunne like a punch, stealing the breath from her lungs. Mama, what are you saying? Her voice wavered, disbelief shaking every syllable. It's for the good of our family, Nwanyike continued, ignoring the terror blooming in her daughter's eyes. If you do this, we will have a son. You'll bring honor to this family, and I can die knowing our name won't vanish. The conversation marked the beginning of Akunne's nightmare. Nwanyike began arranging introductions with wealthy, influential men. Some were much older, men who already had wives and children, but were powerful enough to provide security in exchange for companionship. Akunne would find herself dressed in fine clothes, paraded like an offering at dinners or gatherings where the air felt suffocating and heavy with expectations. But she was always one step ahead of her mother. She had a small knife with her. Immediately, Nwanyike left her and the old man behind. She threatened him, saying that she would kill herself and he would be sent to lifetime imprisonment, as she had written a note implicating all his evil deeds. Chief Ajo hurriedly left her alone and went out of the room. Nwanyike asked him if he was through, and he nodded in agreement without saying a word, and Akunne pretended as though they did something. Anytime Akunne tried to argue, to plead with her mother Nwanyike to see her pain, her mother's response was always the same, a mixture of anger and desperation. "You're selfish, Akunne," she would shout. "You think you're suffering? What about me? I have no one to carry on this family's name. I've sacrificed everything for you, and you repay me with stubbornness." Those words carved into Akunne like knives. The guilt gnawed at her, battling the shame she felt for being pushed into a role she didn't want. The house that once felt like a sanctuary became a prison, where every corner whispered her failures. Every room bore witness to her mother's growing impatience. The pressure reached its peak when Nwanyike brought Chief Okoro to their home. He was a wealthy businessman with influence stretching far beyond the town's borders. His presence filled the room, his cologne strong enough to choke Akunne. He sat with Nwanyike, discussing terms as though Akunne were a commodity. She sat silently, feeling numb, her heart a steady drumbeat of panic. "You will visit my home tomorrow," Chief Okoro said, not as a request but a command. He looked at Akunne and smirked, the glint in his eyes predatory. That night, Akunne couldn't hold back her tears. She curled up on her thin mattress, hugging her knees as silent sobs racked her body. The moonlight that filtered through her window felt cold, indifferent. "Why is my life not my own?" she whispered, her voice shaking as she questioned the night. The next day she visited as instructed, but as usual she went prepared to blackmail Chief Okoro. One evening, after waiting for 2 months and no pregnancy symptoms, Nwanyike took a drastic step. She arranged for a group of local touts to visit their home, hoping they would force Akunne into submission. The plan filled her with guilt, but the weight of her grief and desperation pushed her forward. The evening air was heavy with anticipation when the touts arrived at Akunne's home. Nwanyike had spent the day pacing the small parlor, her heart pounding with a mix of desperation and fear. She opened the door to Afam, the leader, and two other men with hard expressions. Akunne, sensing the tension, looked up from the kitchen with confusion. "Mama, who are these men?" she asked, her voice wavering as a chill swept over her. Nwanyike avoided her daughter's gaze and muttered, "It's for the good of our family." She bolted the door shut, the sound echoing through the room. Panic surged in Akunne's chest as the men stepped closer. "Mama, what's happening?" she cried. Afam smirked, but before he could take another step, Nidu, the youngest of the group, stepped in. He caught Akunne's terrified eyes and remembered her as the girl who once helped his sister, Neka, with reading at the local library. The memory of Neka's joy and gratitude struck him hard. "Wait," Nedu shouted, stepping in front of Afam. "What's your problem?" Afam barked. Nedu's voice shook with resolve. "We can't do this. She's just a girl and she's innocent. We've done rough things, but this is too far." The room fell silent, the tension sharp enough to cut. Afam's eyes narrowed, ready to argue, but Nedu continued. "Think about your sisters, your daughters. Would you stand by if this happened to them?" The other men exchanged uneasy glances. Even they had limits, and this crossed a line they didn't want to breach. Afam hesitated, then, with a frustrated sigh, said, "Fine. Let's go." Nedu lingered for a moment, looking at Akunne, who was crumpled on the floor, tears streaming down. Days passed, And although the failed encounter with the touts had left Akunne shaken, she felt a sliver of hope that perhaps her mother would reconsider her relentless pursuit. But Nwanyike, driven by her grief and desperation, refused to let go of her plan. The memory of Obifuna's small, lifeless body haunted her every moment, fueling her resolve. She could not accept a future where her lineage ended with her daughter. Nwanyike sought out Afam in secret. They met under the cover of night in the shadow of the village's oldest tree, a place where whispers never reached the ears of the townspeople. Afam stood with his arms crossed, eyes cold as he listened. "Last time was a mistake," Nwanyike began, her voice trembling but determined. "I need you to finish what you started. I'll pay double." Afam smirked, the glint in his eyes sharp with greed. "What's the plan this time?" he asked, his tone laced with impatience. "I will handle everything. Tomorrow evening I'll make sure Akunne takes a drink laced with sleeping powder. Once she's weak, you come in and do what you need to do," Nwanyike said, her voice breaking at the edges. Even as the words left her mouth, a wave of shame coursed through her, but she pushed it aside, convincing herself it was all for the legacy of her family. Afam nodded, the promise of money clouding any reservations he might have had. "Consider it done." The following evening, Nwanyike prepared dinner in silence, her hands shaking as she mixed the powder into Akun's drink. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. Akunne, exhausted from the past few days of tension, sat at the table, her eyes hollow with worry. "Mama, is everything all right?" Akunne asked, noticing her mother's distant stare. Nwanyike forced a smile, a thin, fragile curve of her lips. "Everything is fine, Akunne. Drink up. You need your strength." Akunne lifted the cup to her lips, hesitating for just a moment before taking a sip. The bitterness surprised her, but she was too tired to question it. Moments later, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she slumped in her chair, struggling to keep her eyes open as darkness crept in. Nwanyike stood frozen, a battle raging inside her. Before she could act on her conflicting emotions, a loud knock sounded at the door. She rushed to the door and opened it. It was Afam, and he was ready to execute the plan. He hurriedly pulled off his pants and started his job. He succeeded. He successfully and forcefully took advantage of an innocent young Akunne who was barely conscious of what was happening. Nwanyike stood and watched to make sure that Afam released everything possible to get Akunne pregnant for a boy as soon as possible. Immediately, Nwanyike saw a drop of blood from Akunne's private part. She was shocked and frozen. She never knew that Akunne was still a virgin. But then she still wanted a son she would rename Obifuna, implying that her husband's lineage would never be lost. The blood from the forceful penetration stained her clothes. Just as Afam was trying to put on his clothes, a loud knock sounded at the door. It was Nedu. After their encounter, he had been unable to shake the guilt that gnawed at him. He had come to warn Akunne, to ensure no harm came to her. "Nwanyike!" Nedu shouted, banging on the wooden door. Panic surged in her chest. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Nedu pushed past her and saw Akunne slumped over, barely conscious. "What have you done?" he demanded, turning on Nwanyike and Afam with a look of disgust. Just before any of them could say a word, he punched Afam in the face and shouted at him angrily. "Why are you so wicked, Afam?" Afam glanced between Nwanyike and Nedu before hurriedly leaving the room. Nwanyike collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face as the weight of her actions crashed over her. "What have I done?" she whispered, looking at Akunne, who was now being cradled by Nedu. Akunne's gaze found her mother's, filled not with anger but with an aching sorrow. At that moment, Nwanyike realized that she had nearly lost the only child she had left, not to fate but to her own blind pursuit. The guilt was suffocating. Nidu, who had risked everything to protect Akunne even though he came late, helped her sit up and whispered, "You're safe now." I promise Nidu, with a tenderness that belied his rough exterior, helped Akunne to her feet and guided her to her room. He brought cool water to her lips and whispered comforting words, staying by her side as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. He knew that the journey to recovery would be long, but he was determined to be there for her every step of the way. He went out in search of a means to take her to the hospital for checks and other medical care. Akunne couldn't stop crying after she regained consciousness at the hospital, and Nedu told her what happened. "How can my own mother plan for me to be raped? I thought mothers are the kindest and purest. Why is my own mother so selfish and cruel to me?" She sobbed bitterly. Nedu consoled her and told her that everything will be fine. "You will get through this, Akunne. You are a strong young lady with your life ahead of you," Nedu said, comforting her. The next morning, news of what had happened reached the ears of human rights activists in the area, thanks to Nedu's quick call to a contact he trusted. They arrived swiftly, accompanied by law enforcement. Nwanyike, who had spent the night weeping in the corner of the room, didn't resist as they took her away, her eyes hollow with remorse. "Mama, why?" Akunne whispered as they led her mother out. Nwanyike paused, her tear-streaked face crumpling with regret. "I lost my way, Akunne. I am so sorry." The activists searched for a farm, but he was nowhere to be found at the moment. A public announcement was made with a reward to whoever would be able to provide information about him. Akunne visited Nwanyike in custody, where she saw the toll that guilt and loneliness had taken on her mother. They spoke in halting words, heavy with unspoken emotions. "I can never undo what I did," Nwanyike said, eyes downcast. "But if there's any chance for forgiveness, I will spend the rest of my life earning it." Tears filled Akunne's eyes as she reached for her mother's hands. "I forgive you, Mama. We both need to heal." But the unexpected happened. Akunne's life took an unexpected turn few weeks after the ordeal. She found herself pregnant, a consequence of the harrowing encounter she had endured. She told Nedu, who had become her best friend, about the pregnancy and her fears, but he convinced her to keep the baby. "Akum, children are gifts from God, and you never know what he or she would become in the nearest future. I know this baby was conceived in a very unusual way, but it has happened, and I promise to be with you every step of the process. The decision is solely yours to make, but just know that whatever you decide, I will be right here with you till the end of time," Nedu said to her in assurance. As for Afam, he ran away from the village to the city and continued his careless lifestyle. He kept in taking advantage of the vulnerable young girls until he met a girl named Ada. Afam was a streetwise tout who thrived on deception and control. One of his victims was Ada, a quiet young girl who had come to the city seeking a better life. Afam promised her a job and shelter, but his real intentions were cruel. He used and betrayed her, leaving her humiliated and broken. What Afam didn't know was that Ada wasn't as powerless as she seemed. She was the younger sister of Chuka, a feared gang leader in the city. When Ada told Chuka what Afam had done to her, her brother was furious. Chuka didn't confront Afam immediately. Instead, he had his men watch him, tracking his movements. Afam, oblivious to the danger, continued his life at the bus park, unaware that he was being followed. One night, as Afam made his way through a dark alley, a group of men surrounded him. They didn't speak much, but their message was clear. This was for Ada. Afam tried to plead for his life, but it was too late. The gang carried out their orders swiftly and disappeared into the shadows. By morning, Afam's body was found in the alley, leaving the city abuzz with whispers. Many knew him as a manipulative tout, but few knew the real reason for his death. For Ada, justice had been served. Though she carried the pain of his betrayal, she also knew that her brother's actions had ensured Afam would never hurt anyone again. Not everyone is as defenseless as they seem, Ada said to herself. Back to Akunne and her pregnancy. Though the news filled her with a mixture of shock, fear, and uncertainty, Akunne resolved to carry the child. She was determined to love and protect this new life, refusing to let the darkness of her past define her future. The months that followed were both challenging and transformative for Akunne, as she has to deal with the constant reminder of the trauma she endured, yet also a chance to reshape her life. Despite the complicated emotions, Akunne decided to keep the child, viewing it as a symbol of resilience and hope. And Nedu was extremely supportive, more than she ever imagined. Months later, Akunne gave birth to a healthy baby girl. As she held her daughter in her arms, a fierce protectiveness and love washed over her. Her daughter was a new beginning, a light born from darkness, and a reminder that love could emerge from even the most painful experiences. When Nwanyike first saw the child, her heart softened in ways she hadn't expected. In that tiny face, she saw not only her grandchild, but also a reflection of Akunne's strength and forgiveness. She began to realize the deep value of a daughter, not for her ability to bear sons, but for the courage, compassion, and strength she carried. One day, as she watched Akunne tenderly cradle her daughter, Nwanyike spoke with a voice full of regret and newfound understanding. I see now, Akunne, that I was wrong. I let my own fear and pride blind me to the truth. I thought a son would be my legacy, but I see now that you, my daughter, are my greatest gift, and this little one, she is our future. Akunne looked up, a gentle smile on her face. Mama, a child is a blessing, no matter if they are a son or a daughter. It's not their gender that gives them worth. It's who they are. And I'll make sure my daughter grows up knowing that. Through her granddaughter, Nwanyike found a chance for redemption. She poured her love and energy into helping Akunne raise the child, learning alongside her to appreciate the boundless potential within each child. And as she watched her granddaughter grow, Nwanyike's heart finally found peace, realizing that her legacy was not tied to sons, but to the courage and resilience her daughter, and now her granddaughter, embodied. Akunne, too, found healing in her journey as a mother. She devoted herself to building a future where her daughter would grow up empowered and cherished, free from the constraints of her mother's past. Through her own strength and the lessons she passed on, Akunne made sure her family's legacy would indeed endure. But now it was one of love, resilience, and unwavering hope. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe.